There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. There are hopes and treasures.
Hi, you're watching Reveal, Connect and Heal, and I'm the host, Deb Maybury. And today I'm speaking with Peter Saunders from London, England. Welcome, Peter.
Hello, Deb.
It's nice to see you again. I think that the last time, well, I know for in fact the last time that we talked was at the Tragedy to Triumph concert here in Toronto. So it's great to see you again. Peter's with the NAPAC, the Association, National Association for People Abused in Childhood, and he's joining me in my morning and his early afternoon. So, Peter, please begin by telling a little bit about what NAPAC is and what you do and who you serve.
Okay. NAPAC is a charity that it's. I think in North America, you refer them to non-profits or something like that. But we are a charity. We were set up 18 years ago to support people who were abused in childhood, and we are the only national charity in the United Kingdom that does this work. We provide a national free phone helpline, and we also run support groups, and we make visits to survivors in prisons.
Wow, now that's interesting. Tell me a little bit about that.
About what?
The survivors in prison.
Well, we know from experience and we know from research that prisons, both in this country and certainly in other parts of the world, are full of people who have suffered childhood abuse. And in fact, I saw some research recently from New York State where they calculated that something like 78% of the inmates in prisons in New York State, 78%, had suffered some form of abuse in childhood, mostly sexual abuse. And I think that those figures probably apply to the UK. And so we've just run our first support group within a women's prison here. And we've worked with women whose lives have been blighted by abuse and has led them to a life of crime, of addiction. And what we do, NAPAC does, is to really get to the root of somebody's issues, somebody's offending. And as I say, very often the root is in unresolved childhood trauma.
Yes, and I've heard that statistic. In fact, I heard that it was pretty much 100% of females and a very high percentage of males. So I think it's wonderful that you're actually addressing that and going into the prison. I'd be certainly interested in seeing the model that you're using for that. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So you also serve, obviously, everybody in the community. And how do people go about finding you? It's there. It's out there that there are groups that are serving people. And yet, when people go to look, sometimes they don't know where to go specifically.
Yeah. In this country, as in many other parts of the world, there are very, very few resources for adult survivors of childhood abuse, and locating them isn't always easy. We are, as I say, we are the only national charity that does this work, and yet, if you were to go onto the streets of London or Edinburgh or Bristol, the number of people who would have heard of us would be very, very small. We are still a relatively small and unknown charity. But we're growing very rapidly at the moment because of all the revelations that are coming out of abuse by so-called celebrities, famous people who have been apprehended in the last couple of years, some of whom have been convicted and are now serving prison sentences, people who were or are household names in the world of entertainment, for example, and we have the potential of more trials coming up. So all these issues are raising the consciousness, if you like, of society, but they're also acting as a big trigger for many, many survivors who are finding out about NAPAC, often through the internet. They'll Google us, or we get a lot of mentions in national newspapers, agony aunt or agony uncle columns, as we call them here. Problem page editors often mention us in answers to their readers' questions or problems, and many people are referred to us via that way. We also have our leaflets in doctors' surgeries, community centres, places like that. Not everywhere, but wherever we are able to get them out and wherever we're invited to send them, we will always send them out. And we also get a lot of media attention, I have to say. I've just done a TV interview moments before speaking with you, Deb, and earlier this morning I did a radio interview, a live radio interview here, and all this publicity draws people towards us. And we're small, but we do whatever we can to help, but we need to be a lot bigger.
Well, certainly, considering the numbers of people affected, but that's wonderful that you're doing all that work, because the more people that become aware of you, then it also, my main goal is to reduce the stigma and the taboo surrounding sexual abuse. And we have to talk about that. And it takes people like you being out there, and then the people listening, and then realizing that they're not alone. So you started 18 years ago. What's the biggest distinction between 18 years ago and now? That's a long time, and a lot has happened.
A lot has happened, and I suppose the main feature of the last 18 years has been that we have gone from being extremely reluctant to talk about this subject, particularly, sexual abuse, extremely reluctant to talk about it, to becoming slightly less reluctant to talk about it. It's still not something that you hear discussed as widely as you might expect from the media hype that often accompanies the coverage of these cases. But people are acknowledging that it's a massive, massive social problem. And I am now sometimes in a pub having a pint, and I hear the bar staff talking about this issue. That just wouldn't have happened 18, 20 years ago. So people are starting to take note, and that's very much down to the fact that the media are giving us a profile and giving us a lot of airspace and a lot of broadcast minutes. But also I think society is waking up to the evil of child abuse and realizing that it's something that's been around, yes, for thousands of years, but actually it's something we can do a lot more to counter than we've done. And giving survivors a voice is one way in which we can make our contribution, because the thing about perpetrators of abuse, one of the many things about them, apart from the fact that they are cowards, is they do not want the likes of me and other survivors speaking out about these crimes.
Mm-hmm. That is true, and that's exactly what we need to do. I mean, my focus is always on healing, and in order to heal, you have to reveal, you have to be speaking, and you need someone with an ear to listen, and connecting with other people is very important. Now, the last time we were trying to schedule this interview, you were going to see the Pope. So please do tell what happened there and what that was about.
Well, in my I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and in my childhood at my school, I was abused by two Catholic priests, two Jesuit priests, as well as abused by a family member and another teacher. But if you like, I tick the box of having suffered clergy abuse, if you like. Mm-hmm. But I've been, for a number of years, I've been a sort of thorn in the side of the church in this country, because of their appalling record on child protection, on moving abusing priests, on protecting abusing priests and other kinds of clergy, the cover-ups and the disgraceful way in which survivors have been treated. I've been voicing that for a long, long time. And so not many weeks ago, I was at the Vatican a month ago, but it wasn't many weeks before that I took a phone call from the head of the Catholic Safeguarding Board in the UK, who I know. I've met him on a number of occasions, and he wants to support NAPAC, he wants to support survivors, and he rang me out of the blue to say that the Pope was likely to invite me to go and speak to him in Rome, and would I be prepared to do so? And well, you don't get opportunities like that very often.
That's incredible.
And of course I said yes, and he arranged, or the Catholic Safeguarding Board arranged the flights out to Rome, which is only 2 hours away from here, of course, and was whisked over there and whisked into the Vatican, and had a really long, productive chat with Pope Francis on a one-to-one. It wasn't a sort of stage-managed kind of public relations photo call. It was him and me in a room together, chatting, discussing what happened to me, and from my point of view, it was saying to him that the church needed to get its act together and needed to cooperate with the authorities, with the civil authorities, and hand over information that it held about priests who are alleged to have abused and so on. And there's so much more the Catholic Church can do, and the Pope, I hope, can help to make those things happen. I mean, at a local level, if you've got a rogue priest, it's very, very difficult actually to nail them. But the very least that the Vatican can do is to order the dioceses around the world, the bishops, the cardinals, to cooperate completely with the civil authorities. That's one thing I said to the Pope. I told the Pope a little bit about what had happened to me as a child, but the other appeal to him was that survivors need support, and specifically in our case, NAPAC, the charity that I set up and run, needs some support, and I asked him directly if he would consider how that might happen. And I haven't heard anything yet, but I'm told that I am likely to get some kind of positive response. But what that means, I don't know. But the church is a wealthy institution. It can mobilise funds, and it owes me, and it owes many survivors, and I think it would do well from a public relations point of view to throw its weight behind the support of survivors, which wouldn't please all survivors, of course. Some would think I was a heretic to be, if that's the right word, to be talking to the Pope, and I've certainly received a couple of nasty emails from people. But actually, I think you have to engage with people if you're going to move forward, and
Exactly.
I think the meeting was very helpful.
Well, I think it's wonderful. I mean, that's an acknowledgement that there is a problem within the system.
Yeah.
And certainly he's in a position of power.
Yeah.
And if somehow he or the church would allocate funds, I mean, there are always going to be naysayers and people that are going to hair up on their back about these issues and think that you're playing with the enemy or something like that. But in fact, that's not the case in my view. Every association has perpetrators in it everywhere, and this is one that it just has so much media attention. And I mean, the church is huge. All churches have perpetrators in them. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yes.
And if they're prepared to step up and acknowledge this is a problem, and then to put some funds in place to help survivors, I mean, wouldn't that be? I think it'd be incredible if it actually happened within the different churches. If people were able to come forward. Now, maybe somebody who's been violated by a priest would never trust another priest, maybe.
Sure.
But I mean, we have trust issues with everybody anyway.
Absolutely.
So I think it's building the opportunity for people to go there, building whatever the association or the program, whatever you call it, the service within the church. But I think it's great, and what a kind of cool thing for you to experience, to go and have that opportunity and have him receive you.
It was an experience that was really life-changing. I mean, I never thought that I would sit in a room and chat with one of the most powerful people on the planet, and of course at the moment one of the most popular people on the planet, I have to say. And long may that continue, and long may the pressure on him to make things happen, because if he knows he's got popular support for what he's doing, then he will feel encouraged, because there are plenty of people around him there who won't want him to act and to make these changes, because as you say, there are rotten apples in every basket, and there are a few in that place where he is, I'm afraid.
Yes, absolutely. He's putting himself out there more for people. So I think that's important. And I think it's the same thing with the media, that they realize, where the support is going to be. Is there going to be more support if they avoid this issue, or more support if they actually dive into it and acknowledge it and support it? And I mean, people are watching TV programs, and people are watching for what the Pope does, and a lot of people have been pulling away from churches in general. And
Yes.
I'm, you know, part of it's probably this issue too,
Yeah.
because if you've been violated in the church, you're not taking your children into that church.
Right.
So it could be one of the reasons. So there's also, just shifting a little bit, Peter, there's a national inquiry going on. So share a little bit about what's happening there.
Okay. Well, there isn't a national inquiry yet. There was an announcement of a national inquiry, and there was a senior retired judge who was appointed to head up this inquiry, but immediately it was apparent that she was a very inappropriate person to head up the inquiry, and many of us made our feelings known, mostly through the media, I have to say, which was very helpful. Because, you know, writing to government, writing to these people, you get nowhere. But when they see people on TV talking about it, then they tend to react.
Yes.
And she quite rightly stepped down from the role, and we're still waiting for the British Home Secretary to appoint somebody else to chair the panel that will be the inquiry. We haven't had that person named as yet. We wait with bated breath as to whether it will be an appropriate person, but what we're absolutely certain of is that the inquiry will have no credibility whatsoever if it doesn't fully involve survivors and if it doesn't hear from victims, survivors, because we've had inquiries in excuse me, we've had inquiries in the past that have turned out to be brilliantly presented, wonderfully professionally put together whitewashes, and we're not going to accept that this time. We've got to get to the truth. And of course the problem, Deb, is in this country we have a very strong establishment with a capital E that protects itself, and there are far too many people in that establishment with things to lose because they have got a murky past, and there will be some very nervous politicians and former politicians in Westminster who will not want an inquiry because they risk being exposed for past crimes.
But what is it that you hope to achieve with the inquiry?
Well, I think it's very simple. I think what we hope to achieve is to get to the truth, because the truth, as a favourite person of mine once said, that the truth will set us free, and nothing less than the truth has to be the objective and the accepted objective of this inquiry. We need to expose what has gone on, perpetrators of these vile crimes, if there is evidence, have to be brought before the courts, whoever they are, and survivors, most importantly, well, perhaps secondly, I'll come to the most important thing in a minute. Secondly, survivors must be supported, because we hear from so many people whose lives are falling apart because of the consequences of what happened to them. And of course, the constant drip of media attention. And we had a very high profile investigation yesterday that was all over the papers of another very high profile British former kind of pop star, not very well known in your parts of the world, but a very big name over here. And all these things resurrect feelings of, well, all the feelings that are attached to abuse issues. And we've got to have far more resources to support survivors who come forward, and we've got to enable them to come forward and to speak in confidence, in safety, and knowing that they will be taken seriously, and whatever is presented, whatever evidence is presented, will be acted upon, as opposed to an inquiry that just says, well, it was terrible in those days, wasn't it? But it's better now, and let's put that inquiry on the shelf. That is not acceptable. Some of the people who abused people who we hear from today are still active in British politics, and they have got to come before the courts and receive justice. Otherwise, there's no healing and there's no moving on. And the most important thing about all that is that we cannot be serious about child protection today if we don't, in part, try to right the wrongs of the past, and that's the very least that we can do.
Yeah. Now, did you cover the third thing? Because you said there was...
The third thing really is the whole aspect of child protection. We can't be serious about child protection if we don't look at how we have failed so miserably in the past. And to do that, we need to listen to survivors and we need to implement far more effectively our child protection measures. Because in this country, and I'm sure it's the same in your part of the world, and it is everywhere around the world, too many children are still in danger and too many children are being abused as we speak. And we can do so much more to stop it. And I think that the charge to do that has to come from survivors themselves, because we are the ones who really understand something about the damaging consequences of these vile, vile crimes.
Well, I think that's a huge factor, Peter, right? I mean, people don't understand the impact, the long-term impact, say from an offender's point of view. Well, I didn't actually hurt the child, or it was like, maybe a 5-6 year difference. Well, the kid was 10, I was 16, I didn't know what I was doing. That piece, I think if we can get to those people, that is so critical, the awareness piece. And I think you do that by survivors speaking out and saying, yeah, it was once or it was twice, and well, I wasn't physically harmed, but
Yes.
psychologically what that did to me, that is endured, and I've never been able to overcome the shame and the guilt. So what would you say to those type, because I mean they're the people that you're not going to help because they're their thinking pattern is completely off, so they need to be in jail permanently, those perpetrators. The people that they don't realize the consequences. So a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, call it messing or playing doctor. What would you say to that individual to make them realize how significant that those actions are on that child? What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, I mean, when one of the leaflets that one of the booklets that we send out to survivors who make contact with us is the title of the booklet is "Was It Really Abuse?" Because a lot of people, both the victim and the perpetrator, sometimes are left in a state of confusion as to what this was all about. And yes, we have to acknowledge that a lot of young people will engage in what we may deem inappropriate behaviour, and it is, but that is part of growing up, unfortunately. These things happen. But where there is, as you say, Deb, a significant age difference, then we're talking very, very clearly, we're talking about abuse. And there's never an excuse for abuse. But I think getting to grips with how we tackle the whole issue of child protection is something that's an ongoing process. I mean, if I had the answer to if I could solve the problem of child abuse, I would be a guru and a multi-billionaire by now, wouldn't I?
Absolutely.
This is an ongoing, massive social problem that we have only really started to tackle the tip of that iceberg, and we've got a long way to go. But I think we have come some way in the last few years. But we have no truck with people who, for example, suggest that things were different in those days. And I've had that a lot with these celebrities that have been convicted and put in prison. That back in the 70s or 80s, somehow it was okay. No, it was never okay. And there is a difference between abuse and something which is not abuse, and that is that abuse is abuse. And abuse in all its forms has never been acceptable, and the rape and torture of children has never been acceptable at any time in our history. So to try and make something about it being, the 60s, free love culture or whatever, that is a diversion from the reality, because most people don't abuse children, but people who do will only ever use those as an excuse to say, well, it was because of this, it was because of that. That's poppycock. It is never right, and it has never been acceptable to abuse children. And we have to say very, very clearly, black and white, it can never be right, and go from that standpoint. Having said that, of course, we have to acknowledge and be realistic that abuse is a very complex issue. It isn't always straightforward in some respects, and we have to acknowledge that there is a continuum of abuse, all of which is serious, and there is a continuum, if you like, of people who hurt children. There are different categories of abuser. There isn't one size fits all kind of thing. We have to acknowledge all those complications. And I say I don't have the answers, but we need to work more closely with the child protection charities, with social services, people like that. But I think the major contribution that we can make is, as survivors, is to say, this would have been helpful to me 50 years ago, 40 years ago, when it was happening to me. This is what I would like to have known, and this is what I'd like to have been able to do. And that's what we need to be able to say to our children today. If they are feeling uncomfortable, if something is happening that isn't right, then they must know that they can speak out somewhere, and speak out somewhere safely. And that's our message, really.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. On that note, I'm just going to ask you if there's anything else that you wanted to add to that, and because you said so much in that little.
I often you've met me before, Deb. You know I speak. I say far too much, but I think it's wonderful the way survivors around the world now. You know, you there. I was at the SNAP conference in Chicago just a week ago, talking to so many amazing survivors. We're all linking up around the world, and I think that is something that we should continue to do, to speak out as a unified voice, to say, you know, do not hurt children. They only get one chance of childhood. Do not go there. But if you do, you're going to be in big, big trouble. The other message is that we need places like the Gatehouse, we need NAPAC, we need the services that we provide all over the place, not just in our little pockets, our little areas. And we should be fully funded by government. We should be part of society's response to this dreadful disease that we still suffer from in our society. And I'm very grateful for the voice, and it's lovely to speak to you and to see you again, Deb. And I hope I see you again, or come over and visit us sometime. You'd be very welcome.
That would be wonderful. I was in London several years ago, but just as a stopover, so I'd love to see the country more. Thank you so much for sharing all that, and it is so incredibly important that people do speak out when you're ready to speak out. I think there's the first healing stages when people begin to speak, and then, as you know, so many of us turn into advocates later on, and then we have the blessing of then, you know, inspiring other people to speak out, and that is so important on that step towards healing. So thank you for everything that you do, and I know for a fact that we will cross paths more than once in the future. So thank you so much for spending time with myself and the viewers today. So
you're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you everybody who watched this video. You've been watching Reveal, Connect and Heal. I've been speaking with Peter Saunders, and my name is Deb Maybury. Have a good day.
There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken